The dim glow of the restaurant lights flickered, casting restless shadows across the room. I sat alone, my fingers wrapped around a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling as I moved it absently. My gaze remained locked on the corner booth where my wife, Emma, sat. She looked radiant, her laughter chiming like delicate bells, her eyes bright with amusement. It would have been a beautiful sight, if not for the man seated across from her. His presence turned the moment into something bitter. His hand slipped under the table, fingers trailing against her thigh, a touch too intimate, too familiar. My grip on the glass tightened, the ice clinking softly against the sides. A slow, cold knot of anger coiled in my chest, mingling with the deep sting of heartbreak. Yet I remained composed. I had suspected this for weeks. The sudden late nights at work, the secretive way she clutched her phone, the faint scent of a cologne that wasn't mine lingering on her clothes when she came home. Now I had proof. And now I had a plan. For months, I had been preparing for this moment, not with reckless rage but with careful calculation. Emma had betrayed me, and her lover, a man whose name I now knew as Martin, had dared to tread upon the sanctity of my marriage. There would be consequences. Not out of blind vengeance, but a justice sharpened with patience and precision. I had hired a private investigator to gather everything: photographs, text messages, dates, locations. Each piece of evidence meticulously documented and bound in a file that now felt heavier than any weight I had ever carried. This wasn't for the courts. This wasn't about legal proceedings. This was personal. I had no desire to destroy her life. I only wanted her to feel the weight of her choices as heavily as I did. The first step was exposure. A brief search through social media had revealed that Martin was married. His wife, Claire, was a kind-looking woman, her posts filled with smiling pictures of their children and warm family outings. She deserved to know the truth. She deserved the chance to reclaim her life before it crumbled beneath lies. I arranged to meet her at a quiet coffee shop, choosing a secluded corner where prying eyes wouldn't interfere. When she arrived, there was hesitation in her eyes, as if she already knew the storm she was walking into but still clung to the hope that she was wrong. I hated being the one to shatter that hope. Silently, I slid the file across the table. She hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling as she flipped through the contents. Photographs capturing stolen moments, messages exchanged in secrecy, timestamps that formed a damning timeline. Her breath hitched. Tears welled up, pooling in her eyes before spilling down her cheeks. I offered her a tissue, and she accepted it with a quiet nod. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, but laced with steely resolve, she spoke. "Thank you for telling me. I need time to process this, but I appreciate your honesty." We exchanged numbers, an unspoken alliance forming between us. Claire had her own plans for Martin, and together, we ensured his world would not remain unscathed. That evening, I set the next part of my plan into motion. I prepared a dinner at home, setting the table with the kind of meticulous care reserved for special occasions. Candlelight flickered off the polished crystal glasses. A bouquet of her favorite flowers sat at the center, their scent curling softly into the air. The illusion of romance was perfect. When Emma walked in, her eyes lit up in surprise. A smile, warm and unsuspecting, graced her lips as she leaned in to kiss my cheek. "What's the occasion?" she asked, glancing over the carefully arranged table. I smiled back, masking my disdain beneath a practiced charm. Just wanted to spoil my beautiful wife. Dinner unfolded pleasantly. We spoke of small things, work, the neighbors, the upcoming holidays. She laughed, oblivious to the storm creeping closer with each passing second. But as dessert was served, the moment arrived. The weight of the truth pressed against my chest, heavy and inevitable. And so, with the same quiet precision I had wielded all along, I began, my tone calm but unyielding. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately." Emma's smile wavered, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Oh, what about us?" I reached under my chair, retrieving the file I had shown Claire earlier that day. With deliberate slowness, I placed it on the table and slid it toward her. "I think you should see this." Her fingers hesitated before grasping the folder. As she flipped it open, her breath caught. Page after page, the evidence of her betrayal stared back at her in stark detail. Intimate photographs, text messages exchanged in secrecy, dates and locations chronicling each deception. Her hands trembled as she looked up at me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's no need. I replied, my voice steady, my resolve unshaken. I know everything. I've known for weeks. This dinner isn't about explanations or excuses. It's about consequences. Panic settled into her expression, her composure unraveling before me. Please, she pleaded, reaching for my hand, but I withdrew before she could touch me. Let me make this right. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. Mistakes are accidents, I said. This was deliberate. Repeated. A choice you made over and over. And I can't forgive that. A silent understanding passed between us then, an acceptance of the inevitable. I had already spoken to a divorce lawyer, had already made peace with the path ahead. There was only one thing left to do. I reached into my bag and pulled out another document, sliding it across the table just as I had done with the file. Sign these, I said, watching as she stared at the crisp white pages before her. I'm not asking for anything other than my dignity. You can keep the house, the car, whatever. I just want to move on. Tears fell freely now, rolling down her cheeks as her shoulders shook. But I remained resolute. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. With trembling fingers, she picked up the pen and signed. As the ink dried on the paper, I felt something within me loosen, like a chain unshackling, a burden lifting. The weight of her betrayal no longer held me captive. I could finally breathe again. But there was still one last piece of unfinished business. Claire and I had agreed. Martin needed to face what he had done. Together, we arranged to meet him at his office, choosing a time when he would have no easy escape. The moment we stepped through the door, his face turned a deep shade of crimson, panic flashing across his features. What is this? He demanded, his voice uneven, a nervous edge creeping into his usual confidence. Claire stood tall beside me, her voice unwavering. This is your reckoning, she said, her words slicing through the air like a blade. We know everything, and you're going to face the consequences. I stepped forward, placing a copy of the file onto his desk. He hesitated before opening it, his breath growing shallow as he scanned the damning contents. His once arrogant posture deflated, his bravado dissolving into something small and pathetic. He tried to speak, offering excuses, weak apologies, anything to salvage the wreckage he had created. But we weren't there to listen. Claire had already begun divorce proceedings, and Martin, whose career thrived on a carefully constructed image of integrity, was about to suffer the weight of his own deception. He had built his life on lies, and now those lies were caving in around him. As we walked out of his office, a strange sense of peace settled over me. There was no satisfaction in his downfall, only a quiet certainty that justice had been served. Emma and Martin had made their choices, and now they were paying the price. It had never been about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, about ensuring that I would never again live under the shadow of their betrayal. The months that followed became a time of rebuilding. I immersed myself in work, reconnecting with old friends, rediscovering the person I had been before love had turned to deception. The scars of betrayal did not fade overnight, but they became part of my story, a testament to my resilience, a reminder of my strength. One evening, as I sat in my new apartment, a glass of whiskey in hand, I watched the city lights flicker beyond the window. The skyline stretched before me, endless and full of possibility. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle within me, something quiet, something steady. Peace.